They laughed at my car, calling it junk, but they had no idea what was hidden under that rusted hood. You see, in this neighborhood, appearances mean everything. And I was just another homeowner, following all the rules. Until one day, I decided to break the silence. I drove that so-called junk car right in front of their faces. I could already hear their whispers. But what I did next, well, it changed everything. Because that junk car wasn't just worth a few dollars. It was worth $2 million. And I didn't just own that car. I owned their entire block. What do you think happens next? Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to HOA Unit. I'm Mark. And today, I'm about to take you on a wild ride. I live in a quiet little suburban neighborhood, the kind where everything's supposed to be perfect. But trust me, it wasn't. And this story starts with a car and a whole lot of suspicion. You see, in my neighborhood, there's one rule above all. The HOA controls everything, and they don't take kindly to anything out of place. But I had my own plans. So sit back, grab a snack, and let me take you through the twists and turns of this crazy story, starting with a car that no one believed in, and ending with me owning the whole block. The sound of my engine echoed in the quiet neighborhood as I pulled up to my driveway. The engine sputtered a little, but it still roared like it had something to prove. I could see the usual suspects watching from their windows, the same old faces with their suspicious glares, like they were looking for an excuse to report me to the HOA. I didn't care. I had learned long ago to ignore their judgment. I stepped out of the car, and the familiar hum of suburbia surrounded me. Lawnmowers buzzing, birds chirping, and the distant sound of kids playing in the yard, perfect little homes with freshly mowed lawns, and my so-called junk car sitting there like a sore thumb. I could feel the eyes on me, just like every other day. But today was different. I had a feeling something was about to change. As I reached for the door to my house, I heard a car pull up beside me. It was the HOA president, Margot. She always drove that shiny black SUV of hers, the kind that screamed, "I'm in charge," without saying a word. Her house was immaculate. Everything about her screamed control, perfection, authority. But deep down, I knew she wasn't as perfect as she made herself out to be. She rolled down her window, the faintest hint of a smile on her face. "Nice car you got there," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. I could see the slight smirk playing on her lips, like she was waiting for me to feel embarrassed, like she was just waiting to poke fun at me. I glanced over at my car, and for a moment I could almost hear it laughing back at her. It wasn't a luxury vehicle, sure, but it was mine, and it had a history that most of these neighbors didn't understand. Margot was still waiting for me to respond, her smirk widening. "I mean, it's been sitting there for months. Don't you think it's time to clean up a bit?" Her words stung more than I cared to admit. I'd dealt with the comments before. But something about the way she said it, the way she looked down at me, like I wasn't worthy of even owning something like this, it hit harder than usual. I didn't want to play into her game, didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had rattled me. So I just shrugged, acting as casual as I could. "It still runs," I said with a grin, even though I could feel the heat rising in my face. She let out a small, mocking laugh. "Runs? If you can call that thing running, I'd be surprised if it even passed a basic inspection." Her eyes scanned my car from top to bottom, like she was inspecting some dirty old relic. Could feel her judging me, and I hated it. Every time someone like her looked down on me, it reminded me of how much I didn't fit in here. But honestly, I didn't need their approval. I had never needed it. As she slowly drove off, still chuckling to herself, I stood there in my driveway, my hands clenched into fists, but I didn't hit anything, didn't punch the car, didn't shout at her. I simply stood there, and I let the frustration wash over me. I had learned something over the years of living in this neighborhood. People like Margot, they lived for power. They thrived on making others feel small, like they had control over every little detail of your life. The HOA had given her that power, and every time she passed by, she reminded me of it. But today, something was different. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else make me feel like I didn't belong here. I took a deep breath and turned to go inside, trying to shake off the feelings that were bubbling up inside of me. I knew if I let them control me, let their petty words get to me, they'd win. And I wasn't about to let that happen. But then, as I stepped inside, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. There, on the kitchen counter, was the letter. The one that I had been waiting for. The one from the HOA. My heart sank as I opened it. The red stamp of the HOA office staring me right in the face. Violation notice. Unsightly vehicle. I wasn't surprised, but I didn't like it. I wasn't going to let them push me around anymore. No more warnings. No more fines. I wasn't the kind of guy to back down from a fight, especially when I had a plan in mind. As I sat down, I couldn't help but wonder, how far was Margot willing to take this? I looked at my car from the window. It was still sitting there, untouched, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in this neighborhood, a symbol of their power trips and judgment. But little did they know, that car was about to become something much bigger, something they never saw coming. But for now, I had to play my cards right. I had to figure out how to turn the tables, without them realizing it too soon. I couldn't stop thinking about Margot's smirk, the way she'd looked at my car, like it was a piece of junk she couldn't wait to get rid of. But deep down, I knew there was something she didn't understand. To her, everything had to be pristine, perfect, and anything that didn't fit that image didn't belong. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the HOA violation letter still sitting in front of me, taunting me. This wasn't just about a stupid car, it was about control, about who had the power in this neighborhood. And right now, the HOA thought they had it all. They thought they could push people around, make us follow their rules, and punish anyone who didn't fit into their little box. But I wasn't about to let that happen. Not this time. I knew how this game worked. I'd been watching it for years. The quiet judgments, the whispers behind closed doors, the petty fines, and the endless regulations. The HOA president, Margot, was just one piece of the puzzle. Behind her was a whole group of people who lived for the power that came with being in charge of a neighborhood. Every house was like a little kingdom, with rules that governed everything from the height of your grass to the color of your mailbox. The thing about this neighborhood was that everything was so perfect on the surface. From the perfectly manicured lawns to the shiny cars parked in every driveway, it looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of place where the neighbors always smiled at each other, even if it was a little forced. I had never quite fit in here. My house wasn't the biggest, and my lawn wasn't the greenest. But that didn't bother me. Until now. Margot and the rest of the HOA made it their mission to make sure everyone conformed to their image of perfection. And if you didn't, you were an outsider. Someone who didn't belong. But now I realized that maybe, just maybe, that outsider might be the one who turned the tables. The next day, I went about my usual routine, trying to keep my mind off the violation letter. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was a slap in the face, a reminder that Margot and her crew thought they controlled everything. They didn't know me. They didn't know what I was capable of. As I was out in the yard, working on my car, making a few repairs that I knew I could handle, I saw Margot drive by again. I wasn't sure if she was trying to make me feel small or if she just couldn't resist a quick peek at my so-called junk. Either way, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me bothered. She slowed down, rolled her window down, and shot me that same condescending smile. "Still trying to fix it up, huh?" she said, with that same mocking tone. I didn't look up. "Yeah, just making sure it runs." She chuckled, shaking her head. "I don't know how you can live like this. I'd be embarrassed." I stood up slowly, wiped my hands on a rag, and turned to look at her. For the first time, I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, the nerve of her. She didn't know anything about me, about my life. All she saw was a car that didn't meet her standards, a car that didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. I gave her a smile, the kind that doesn't show any teeth, the kind that hides the storm brewing underneath. "Maybe you should worry about your own driveway first." Her face froze for a second. She clearly didn't expect that. I could see the anger flicker in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a fake smile. "Well, I'll leave you to it," she said, speeding off. That was it. I'd had enough. I walked back into my house, grabbed the violation letter from the counter, and stared at it for a long moment. I was done playing by their rules. It was time to show them who was really in control. But how could I do that? How could I make them understand that they weren't the ones who held the power here? I wasn't sure yet, but I had an idea. A few weeks ago, I'd overheard some neighbors talking about the new neighborhood regulations. They were all upset about a new rule, one that made the HOA even more powerful. Apparently, they'd been secretly meeting to discuss new ways to fine people and impose even stricter rules on lawn care, home improvements, and even the color of the paint on your house. They wanted to create a uniform look, a perfect look. I couldn't let that happen. So, I decided to dig a little deeper. I wasn't going to let them continue to trample over everyone else. If they were going to make life difficult for people like me, then it was time for me to do the same. I spent the next few days going through old HOA documents, looking for anything that would give me an edge. I needed to find a way to flip the power back in my favor. And that's when I found it. A loophole. Apparently, the HOA had a rule about property ownership that they'd accidentally overlooked. It was buried deep in their bylaws, and it could be used against them. They didn't know I'd found it, but I sure as hell was going to use it. But there was a catch. I needed more than just the car to make this work. I needed something else, something bigger. And that's when I realized it wasn't just about my car anymore. It was about taking back control, one step at a time. I wasn't just going to fix my car. I wasn't just going to stand up to Margot. I was going to make them all pay for what they'd done. But what would they do when they found out I wasn't going to back down? Would they finally realize they'd made a mistake? Or would they fight back even harder? The days felt like they were dragging on. Each morning I'd wake up, walk past my junk car, and feel that knot in my stomach. The HOA had made their mark on me. Their violation letter sat on my kitchen counter like a constant reminder of what they thought of me, what they thought of my place in this neighborhood. But something had changed in me, a quiet shift that was slowly building. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I wasn't going to roll over and accept their control. It wasn't just about my car anymore. It was about me, about proving a point, about showing Margot and the HOA that their power trips were about to come to an end. I kept thinking about the loophole I'd found in the HOA's own documents, buried deep in the bylaws, unnoticed by everyone except me. If they thought they had control over my life, they had another thing coming. But I wasn't going to use it just yet. Not until I had all my pieces in place. And I needed something big, something bold, something that would grab their attention and make them realize that I wasn't someone to be messed with. The breaking point came one afternoon. I was out in the yard, getting my hands dirty as usual, trying to fix what I could on my car. I didn't know exactly how, but I was determined. I was almost done with a small repair when I noticed Margot's car slow down in front of my house. She wasn't driving by this time. No, she was stopping. I stood up, wiped my hands on a rag, and turned to face her. Her windows were rolled down, and she was staring at me with that smug, condescending look she always wore. But this time, there was something different in her eyes. It wasn't just her usual disapproval. It was something darker. "I noticed you're still out here, with that thing," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I just walked over to the front of my car, lifted the hood, and pretended to inspect the engine. I knew she was watching. I could feel her eyes on me, judging me, looking for something to use against me. But today was different. Today, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. "You know," she continued, her voice becoming a little sharper, "the HOA board is really considering your situation. They're going to have to take action soon if this car isn't removed. It's a nuisance." I closed the hood and turned to face her. "Really? A nuisance? Or maybe it's just inconvenient for you to have something out of place, something that doesn't fit your perfect little image of this neighborhood." Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the irritation building. "You really don't understand, do you? This is about the rules, the standards, people like you, people who can't follow the rules. They disrupt the harmony of the community." I could feel my anger bubbling up, but I kept my tone calm. "You know, I think you've spent so much time worrying about everyone else's business. Maybe it's time you took a good look at your own. Who exactly are you trying to impress?" Her smile faltered for a moment. "What are you implying?" she asked, her voice cold. "I'm just saying. Maybe it's time you stopped trying to control everything. Maybe it's time someone reminded you that not everyone lives to please you, or the HOA. For a brief moment, the air between us crackled with tension. Then, without another word, she started her car and sped off, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding. I had finally said it. The words that had been building up inside of me for weeks, and it felt good. But that wasn't enough. The car wasn't enough. It wasn't about the petty insults anymore. It was about standing my ground, taking back control from people who thought they could dictate how I lived. It was about showing them that they couldn't push me around. That afternoon, I sat down with my laptop and started to plan. I had all the pieces, and now it was time to put them together. I wasn't going to just sit back and accept another fine. I wasn't going to let Margot or the HOA think they had the final say in what happened to my car or my property. I spent hours going through the loophole I had found, making sure I understood every detail. I was getting ready to send the HOA a letter of my own, one that would blow their little control trip out of the water. It was time for them to realize that the rules didn't apply to everyone, especially not to someone who understood how to play the game. The letter was ready. The plan was in motion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. There had to be more to this than just winning against the HOA. There had to be something bigger at play. As I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, I realized that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving that even the smallest guy in the neighborhood could take back power from the people who thought they were untouchable. And when I finally hit send on that letter, I knew it was only a matter of time before the HOA came knocking on my door. But this time, I wouldn't be the one backing down. This time, I would make them realize that they'd messed with the wrong person. But now, I couldn't help but wonder, When they finally realized what I had done, how would they react? Would they come at me with everything they had, or would they back off, realizing they couldn't win? It wasn't long before I received a letter. It wasn't from the usual HOA reminder of fines or violations. No, this one was different. It was a formal notification from the HOA board itself requesting an immediate meeting with me. They'd finally decided to take action. The game was on, and I could feel the tension building in the pit of my stomach. I had expected this. They wouldn't back down easily. But I wasn't about to play by their rules. Not anymore. Instead of fighting them with anger or defiance, I had a better idea. I decided to play their game, and I would play it better than they ever could. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA office with the same violation letter in hand. The board members were already seated at a long table, their faces stone cold, waiting for me to walk in. "Mr., your last name?" Margot greeted me with a tight smile. "Glad you could join us." I took my seat at the table. They were all waiting for me to react, to get defensive, to argue my case. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I sat back, crossed my arms, and smiled. If they thought this was going to be a typical confrontation, they were wrong. "I'm here," I said calmly, "to address your concerns." They exchanged confused glances. They weren't used to people like me. They were used to compliant residents who cowered in the face of their authority, who either paid their fines or let their cars rot in the driveway. They weren't prepared for someone who would do the exact opposite. "You violated our rules," Margot said sharply, her voice full of authority. "Your car has become a nuisance to the neighborhood. It's unsightly. It doesn't belong here." I could feel my heart rate slowing, the calmness washing over me as I leaned forward slightly. "So, what's the solution?" I asked innocently. "You want me to get rid of it? Sell it to some junkyard and take another fine? Or is this going to be another violation letter, another attempt to control me?" Margot's eyes flickered with frustration, but she quickly regained her composure. "We've already given you warnings, Mr. Your last name. Now we're considering more drastic measures. You could face a hefty fine. We may even consider legal action." I smiled again. "And if I comply with your demands, what happens then?" Her expression faltered for a moment. She clearly wasn't prepared for this. "Well," she said slowly, "if you take action to remove the car, we can close the case and avoid further escalation." "Perfect," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I'll remove the car, but I'll need to make sure I follow all of your other rules first." Margot's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" I sat up straight, my fingers tapping lightly on the table. "I mean, if I'm going to remove the car, then I'd like to make sure everything else in my house meets the standards too. The grass, the mailbox, the paint on the house. I'll make sure I comply with every single rule you've set." The board members exchanged glances again. They were confused. They weren't expecting compliance. They were expecting me to argue, to resist, to fight them back. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to fight them with anger. I was going to fight them with their own rules. For the next few weeks, I followed every single rule the HOA had put in place. I painted my mailbox the exact color they required, even though I didn't want to. I trimmed my grass down to the perfect height, though I preferred it a little taller. I didn't care about these little things, but they did, and I knew that was the key. I had learned their game, and now I was going to win it. The strangest part? The more I complied, the more irritated they seemed to get. It was like they didn't know how to handle someone who played by the rules, but didn't really care about the outcome. I even started to notice the little things, the whispers behind my back when I passed the neighbors. They thought I was finally learning my place. They thought I was just another homeowner going along with the flow, but I wasn't. I had become a ghost in their system. They couldn't see me anymore, couldn't tell if I was truly complying or just playing along. Margot, in particular, didn't know how to respond. Every time she saw me doing yard work or adjusting my mailbox, she would eye me with a mix of confusion and suspicion. She clearly wanted me to fail, to break one of their rules so she could pounce, but the more I complied, the more it frustrated her. It was almost too easy. I had become the perfect neighbor. Everything was flawless. On the surface, I was just another one of the conformists. But underneath, I was preparing for the perfect moment to strike. Then one evening I got the call. It was from a neighbor, one who had been watching the HOA board closely. They had no idea I knew this, but I'd been keeping tabs on the behind-the-scenes drama. The board had decided to make another move. They were planning to slap another fine on me for something completely ridiculous. The timing couldn't have been better. They were giving me the perfect opportunity to make my move. They thought I was still just another homeowner following the rules, following their ridiculous standards, but I was about to turn it all around. I couldn't help but laugh to myself. They had no idea what was coming. I started to gather my paperwork, the violations, the loopholes, the absurd fines. I was ready to hit them where it hurt. They thought they had the power. They thought they had control. But now, I had it. I wasn't just going to play their game anymore. I was about to rewrite the rules. But here's the question. When I finally drop the bomb on them, do you think they'll back down? Or do you think they'll go all in, trying to prove they're still in control? I could feel the tension building in my chest as I sat there, staring at the stack of papers in front of me. The HOA had pushed me too far. Every letter, every fine, every snide remark from Margot had pushed me to the edge, and now I was ready to make my move. They thought they were in control. They thought that just because they had a clipboard full of rules, they could dictate how I lived my life. But now, it was time for me to show them that I had something much more powerful than their rules: the truth. I'd spent the last few weeks complying with every single regulation, making sure that I followed their rules to the letter. But as I went over my plan, one thing became crystal clear. I had given them what they wanted, and now it was my turn to take back what was mine. I had all the evidence I needed: the violation notices, the fines, the endless complaints. I wasn't just about to fight back with words anymore. I was going to expose them, the whole HOA system, their greed, their control, all of it. The night before I was set to meet with Margot and the rest of the board, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, thinking of every possible way this could go. Would they back down when they realized they were in the wrong? Or would they dig in their heels, try to push me even further? I didn't know yet, but I was ready for whatever came next. Morning came, and I stood in front of my car, the very one they had mocked for so long. The engine, once sputtering and tired, now purred as if it were ready to face the world. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a symbol of everything they had tried to tear down. It was mine, and it was worth more than any of them could ever imagine. When I walked into the HOA office, I could feel their eyes on me. Margot was already sitting at the head of the table, her arms crossed, wearing that smug smile of hers. The other board members sat silently, probably hoping this would be just another routine meeting where they could tell me what to do and watch me crumble under their so-called authority. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't here to beg for their forgiveness or ask for their permission. This time, I was here to show them who was really in charge. "Mr. Your last name," Margot started, her voice dripping with condescension. "I trust you've made the necessary changes to your car and your property?" I smiled, sitting down at the table and putting the stack of documents in front of me. "Oh, I've made plenty of changes. But it's not just my car that's the issue, is it? Her eyes flashed. What do you mean by that? I slid the documents across the table. I've done everything you've asked. My lawn is perfect. My mailbox is the right height. My house is painted the right color. And yet, you've continued to find me, harass me, and make my life a living hell. Margot's face tightened. We've had many complaints about your car. I nodded. Yes, I know. And that's where this comes in. I reached into my bag and pulled out the one thing I'd been holding back. A property valuation report. The report for my car. I let the silence linger as I placed the paper on the table. Margot's eyes immediately went to the report, and I could see her trying to hide her shock. You see, Margot, I continued, this isn't just some junk car. It's worth $2 million, and that's not even the best part. Margot blinked, clearly thrown off. What are you trying to say? I leaned forward, my voice steady but full of purpose. I'm not just some guy with a clunker. This car is worth more than most of your homes combined. And I own it. But more than that, I own a lot more than you think. I paused for effect, letting that sink in. Margot shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her control was slipping, and I could see it. I've been doing some research, I went on, and I found a little loophole in your own bylaws. Turns out if I own a certain percentage of property in this neighborhood, I can override your decisions. That means I have a say in what happens here, and as of this moment, I have the power to change the way this HOA runs. The room went completely silent. I could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as they processed what I'd just said. Margot recovered first. This is preposterous. You can't possibly— Oh, but I can, I interrupted, and I will. You've made my life miserable for far too long, and now it's time for you to pay the price. The other board members were looking back and forth, their faces pale. They didn't know what to do. They had no idea how to handle someone who knew the rules better than they did, someone who had taken their system and turned it on its head. You can fine me all you want, I said. You can try to punish me for every little thing, but from now on, I'll be the one making the rules. You've spent so long trying to control people, but you've forgotten one thing. People don't like to be controlled. Margot's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. You think this is some kind of joke? No, Margot, I said, standing up. This isn't a joke, this is justice, and it's finally my turn to call the shots. I turned to leave, but before I could walk out the door, Margot's voice stopped me. You think this will end well for you? You think you'll just get away with this? I smiled without turning back. I'm not worried about getting away with it. You're the one who's worried. You're the one who's about to lose everything. The door slammed behind me as I left the room, and as I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. I had done it. I had turned the tables. I wasn't just fighting back anymore. I was winning. But as I got into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They were going to come after me. Hard. But I had the upper hand now, and they didn't even know what was coming next. It was a surreal feeling, walking away from that HOA office. The adrenaline was still rushing through me as I made my way back to my car, the wind biting at my skin. I could feel the weight of what had just happened. I had dropped the bomb. I had turned their game upside down, and yet I knew that Margot and the rest of the HOA board wouldn't go down without a fight. But here's the thing. They didn't know who they were dealing with. As I started my car and drove back home, my mind raced with possibilities. I had exposed the truth. I had laid out the facts. And now I wasn't just a guy with a junk car. I was a force to be reckoned with. I owned more of this neighborhood than they ever realized, and I had the leverage to make sure that no one would ever bully me again. But something nagged at me. I wasn't entirely sure what Margot and the board were going to do next. They were powerful, used to getting what they wanted. They had the means to retaliate, and if I wasn't careful, they could still make my life a living hell. I knew I had to stay one step ahead of them. I spent the next few days making sure everything was in order. My mailbox was perfectly positioned. My grass was trimmed to the exact height they demanded. The car, still parked in the driveway, sitting proudly, waiting for them to do something about it. Every time I stepped outside, I saw Margot's eyes watching me from across the street. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. The tension between us was palpable. I had made my move, but I knew she wouldn't let it slide without some sort of retaliation, and I was ready for whatever came next. The first strike came a week later. A letter arrived in the mail. I'd been expecting it, but it still made my blood boil. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting. They wanted to discuss my recent actions and how it was affecting the neighborhood. It was clear what they were trying to do: scare me. They were hoping that if they threatened enough, I'd back down, apologize, and play by their rules again. But they had no idea how far I was willing to go. I knew this meeting was their last chance to get me to comply. They had no other cards to play. This was it. I showed up to the meeting on time, dressed like I was going to an important business meeting. I wasn't going to let them think for 1 second that I was intimidated. As I entered the room, the board members were all seated at the table, their faces stiff and serious. Margot, of course, was at the head of the table, her eyes narrowed with an unmistakable look of frustration. "Mr. Your last name," she said, her tone icy. "We've called this emergency meeting to discuss your actions. We've received multiple complaints from other homeowners, and frankly, your recent behavior is unacceptable." I raised an eyebrow and leaned back in my chair. "Complaints?" I asked. "From who?" "Because I've been following every single rule you've set. In fact, I've gone above and beyond to make sure I meet every single regulation." Margot's face turned slightly red. She wasn't used to being challenged like this. "You're mocking us," she said, her voice trembling slightly with anger. "You think you can just break the rules and walk away with no consequences? This isn't how things work around here." I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of apology. It was a smile of knowing that I had all the power now. "Margot, I'm not breaking any rules. I'm following every rule you've set out, and I'm doing it better than anyone else here. The problem is that you can't stand someone who's not afraid to stand up to you." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and I could tell she was trying to contain herself. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to proceed. They were starting to realize that I wasn't the same person they had bullied before. "I'm afraid this isn't just about rules anymore," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "This is about something much bigger. This is about power. And right now, I have the power." Margot stood up abruptly, slamming her hand on the table. "You think you can just come in here and take over? You think you can control this neighborhood like some kind of dictator? You don't have the authority." "I have more authority than you think," I cut in, my voice steady. "And the moment you stop trying to control everything, that's when you'll realize I'm not the enemy here." The room went dead silent. I could see the other board members exchanging glances, trying to figure out what to do next. They were losing control, and they knew it. This wasn't just about me and my car anymore. This was about the entire HOA system, and they were starting to see that they were the ones who were outmatched. Margot's face was now pale, and she looked like she was about to explode. But instead of saying anything more, she sat down and stared at me, her eyes burning with hatred. "I'll make this simple for you, Margot," I said, standing up to leave. "You've lost. You can either accept it or keep fighting a battle you can't win." I turned to leave the room, my heart pounding with excitement. I had just done something they never saw coming. But as I walked out of the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that Margot wasn't going to let this go. She wouldn't just roll over. She would come at me with everything she had left. The power had shifted, but now I had to deal with the aftermath. The next move was theirs, but I was ready for it. I had the upper hand, and I was going to make sure I didn't lose it. It's funny how quickly things change. One moment, you're just a guy in a quiet neighborhood, minding your own business. The next, you're the one holding all the cards. But let me tell you something. You never realize how much power you have until you see the fear in someone else's eyes. The day after my meeting with Margot and the rest of the HOA board, I could tell the air had changed. It was like the neighborhood knew something had shifted, but no one quite knew what it was. People stopped looking at my car like it was some piece of trash. They didn't look at me with the same judgment they once did. It was subtle, but it was there. The balance of power had tipped. But I could feel Margot's rage simmering beneath the surface. She wasn't the kind of person who just let things go. I knew she would try to make one last attempt to regain control. She'd probably send me another letter, another fine, another warning. But this time, I was ready. I had one final move left in my back pocket, one that would be the nail in the coffin for her reign, and I had to make it count. That afternoon, I received a phone call. It was from one of the neighbors, someone I'd been friendly with over the years. "Hey, I don't know if you've heard yet," he said, "but there's a big meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at the HOA office. They're calling it an emergency meeting. Word is, Margot's trying to get you thrown out of the neighborhood." I wasn't surprised. Margot wasn't the type to back down easily. But this time, I wasn't going to let her use her usual tactics. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She was trying to rally the neighbors against me, get them all on her side so that she could make my life miserable again. But what she didn't realize was that I already had the upper hand. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA office just like the previous meeting. This time, though, I wasn't walking in alone. I had a plan, and I was bringing reinforcements. When I stepped into the room, the board members were already seated. Margot, of course, was at the head of the table, looking even more frustrated than last time. She was trying to keep her cool, but it was obvious she was losing control. "Mr. Your last name," she said through clenched teeth. "This is your final chance to resolve this matter. You've made a mockery of this entire neighborhood, and now you need to leave." I smiled. "Actually, Margot, it's you who's made a mockery of this place. You've used your position to bully and control people, and it's time that ended." Before she could interrupt, I motioned for the door, and a few familiar faces walked in. Several of the neighbors who had had enough of the HOA's antics. People who'd been quietly watching from the sidelines, too afraid to speak out, but now ready to stand with me. "Today," I said, addressing the board, "we're not just here for a simple discussion. We're here to make sure that the HOA no longer has the power to control this neighborhood." Margot's face turned white as the room filled with murmurs. This wasn't what she'd expected. She was used to silence, to everyone agreeing with her, but now she had a room full of people who were done with the games. "We've had enough," one neighbor said. "Margot's been running this place like a dictatorship for too long." Another neighbor added, "We've all seen the fines, the constant threats. It's time for change." Margot tried to speak, but her voice was shaking. This is insubordination. You can't do this. You don't have the authority to—" I stood up, cutting her off. "I don't need your authority anymore, Margot. We've all been living under your thumb, but no one's going to be afraid of you anymore." I turned to the rest of the room. "We're here to take back control. We're here to make sure this neighborhood is a place where we can live in peace, where we don't have to be scared of someone coming around to check the height of our grass or the color of our mailboxes. And it starts today." The room was silent, but the energy was electric. For the first time, I could see the other board members looking at Margot, some of them with pity, others with outright disgust. They had followed her blindly for so long, but now they saw the cracks in her reign. They saw that she wasn't the leader they thought she was. "I'm going to propose a new set of bylaws," I continued. "Ones that benefit the community as a whole, not just a small group of people with too much power." Margot's hands were shaking as she looked around the room. The board members were whispering among themselves, and I could tell that the tide had completely turned. She was losing them. In a last-ditch effort, she stood up, her voice trembling with fury. "You can't do this. I won't let you—" I interrupted her again. "You've had your chance, Margot. You've had your power. Now it's time for everyone to have a voice. You're finished." With that, I walked toward the door, my neighbors following behind me. The board members stayed silent, and Margot just stood there, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. I had done it. I had taken back control of the neighborhood. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the one who had rewritten the rules. And now, the HOA would never be the same. As I stepped outside, I looked up at my car, that old rust bucket. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a symbol of everything I'd been through, everything I'd fought for. And now, it was a symbol of my victory. But the question is, what happens next? Will Margot accept defeat, or will she keep trying to regain control? Will the HOA finally learn that power can't be taken? It has to be earned? What do you think will happen next? Let me know in the comments.